Despite the shifting sands present in the video game industry, it can be easy to take the existence of some game companies, publishers, and developers for granted. Even some of the most prestigious and talented creators and their companies can lose their reputations in a short amount of time, left behind as the industry marches indifferently onward. No matter how secure or well-established a creator or developer may seem, the fickle nature of the gaming industry can turn against game creators and their properties at a moment's notice. This is why some creators, like their games, fade into obscurity. Some gain a niche following, and some become icons. This entry of Pet Projects of Gaming Icons will feature Too Human, the pet project of Denis Dyack that spent 10 years in development limbo and would turn out to unexpectedly become one of the last released projects by Dyack and Silicon Knights, the game development company he co-founded. The tale of Too Human is a tragic one that resulted in the demise of many careers, franchises, and even a company once held in the highest regard. But before you can understand Too Human, you have to understand Denis Dyack and the journey he shared with Silicon Knights. Born in July of 1966 in St. Catharines, Canada, Denis Dyack graduated from Brock University with a bachelor's in physical education and an honorary bachelor's in computer science. He also received a master's of science in computer science from the University of Guelph. He co-founded Silicon Knights in 1992 and began developing games for computers. These included Cyber Empires for the Amiga, Atari ST, and DOS, then Fantasy Empires in 1993, and also Dark Legions in 1994 for DOS. On a personal level, Dyack is a polarizing figure. In contrast to many of the past controversies that have plagued Dyack's reputation, many who know him best have described him as generous, caring, sincere, and genuine. He is known for his brilliant storytelling abilities and frequently leaves an impression on those he meets with his strong creative talents. However, Denis is also known to be headstrong, emotional, passionate, and opinionated. Geronimo Barrera spoke of a time when staff from Crystal Dynamics worked closely with Silicon Knights and Denis Dyack. He once stated, "You know who left a big impression on me at the time? Denis Dyack. I remember one time, something was going on and Denis was unhappy. There was screaming, the cops showed up, it was all over the place. But then I thought, that's cool, that's rock and roll, and that's why I'm in this industry." I never looked at it as unprofessional. I always looked at it like, yeah, someone's got strong opinions about how things should be done, and that's that. Although able to inspire loyalty with his disarming demeanor and creative vision, Denis has been described by certain individuals who may or may not have had ulterior motives to portray him in a certain light, as a severely intense person. Dyack's tendency to become very attached to the projects he works on has led him and his former development team to achieve true greatness in the gaming industry. Unfortunately, this same quality can, without the proper guidance, bring out the worst in him as well. Later in life, Dyack would acknowledge these faults, musing that one of the greatest challenges in life is coming to terms with oneself as a person, and that includes recognizing things one dislikes about oneself. He has since devoted himself to changing as a person and striving to become his best self. The history of Too Human actually starts shortly before the release of Blood Omen: Legacy of Kain, released on DOS and the Sony PlayStation. This would be the first game in which Silicon Knights would begin their transition into developing games for home consoles. Originally, Blood Omen began as a project referred to as the Pillars of Nosgoth, which was a high fantasy genre game that was initially intended to be released on the 3DO. However, after the less than stellar launch of Panasonic's ill-fated console, Silicon Knights were keen to find another platform to work with. Dyack would meet with producer Lyle Hall of Crystal Dynamics, who was interested in publishing for Silicon Knights. Hall and Dyack shared their ambitions to produce games of a budget and scope that went beyond the expectations of industry standards at the time. Soon, Crystal Dynamics received pitches from Silicon Knights that included Too Human and the Pillars of Nosgoth. Crystal Dynamics nearly published Too Human, but decided to settle on the Pillars of Nosgoth since they felt that a high fantasy setting was more likely to perform well in sales at the time than a science fiction genre game. Soon, Blood Omen Legacy of Kain would evolve from this project and would enjoy a fair amount of financial and critical success. A little-known fact is that a port of Blood Omen was planned for the Sega Saturn as well, but was soon cancelled, most likely due to the complicated architecture for the console that scared away most game developers. This would be the first and last game in the relationship between Crystal Dynamics and Silicon Knights. After the 3DO's poor launch sales, an agreement for Blood Omen Legacy of Kain was written up and signed between the two companies. Not long after this, Silicon Knights would file an injunction against Crystal Dynamics, claiming that the publisher opportunistically took advantage of Silicon Knights' financial duress to begin taking over the project in an attempt to extort the IP away from its original creators. Crystal Dynamics protested that Blood Omen was a project in dire straits that needed to be reworked and overhauled, and that a large amount of assistance was provided to keep the project alive. Crystal Dynamics would settle out of court, and little is known regarding the specifics of this agreement as a strict NDA was signed. All that is known for sure is that Silicon Knights would concede ownership of Blood Omen Legacy of Kain to Crystal Dynamics. This event is important to understanding the situation of Too Human, as it provides a glimpse into Denis Dyack's limitations in the realms of business management and legal agreements that resulted in losing the creation of a successful intellectual product. Conceptually, Too Human was conceived just before Blood Omen, and was also planned to be released on Sony's PlayStation. However, this version of Too Human was much different than the Xbox 360 incarnation. This was a futuristic cyberpunk game in which limbs and other body parts could be replaced or enhanced with chips and machinery intended to allow players to customize their character to complement their preferred style of gameplay. For example, a player that enjoyed stealth gameplay would opt for different enhancements than a player who preferred a more action-oriented experience. Those who had seen the project claimed that it looked as good as Final Fantasy VIII. The project was cinematically ambitious as well, boasting an hour of full-motion video animation. The project was reputed to require 4 discs when finished. Soon, EA MGM would offer to publish the game jointly. However, after years of development, when Silicon Knights missed their targeted release date, EA MGM pulled out. This was unfortunate, as Too Human was approaching alpha levels of completion, and Dyack claimed that they would have only needed a few more months to completely finish the game. Almost out of nowhere, Nintendo swooped in and invested a substantial sum of money into Silicon Knights by purchasing a large chunk of the company. As Silicon Knights was now a second-party developer affiliated with Nintendo, all work on the original version of Too Human was scrapped. Dyack and his team would focus their energies into developing the original version of the psychological horror game Eternal Darkness for the Nintendo 64. All work for this version of Eternal Darkness would be scrapped and development would be started over for the GameCube, where it would be successfully launched to much critical acclaim and fanfare. Denis Dyack would work with industry giant Shigeru Miyamoto and receive input from Miyamoto-san in the development for Eternal Darkness, as well as for the eventual GameCube port of Hideo Kojima's classic that would be entitled Metal Gear Solid: The Twin Snakes. During this time, Silicon Knights was working on a concept for Too Human on the GameCube, creating a concept FMV ostensibly shown at Space World 2000. An IGN correspondent reported on the trailer, describing it as a dark and gloomy action RPG that takes place in 2450 AD, where half cybernetic humans are a reality. While some Norse influences seem to have taken hold in this incarnation of the game, it nevertheless appears to have followed the same line of thought as the PlayStation version, in which you play as a futuristic cop investigating the death of your partner as you traverse a futuristic cityscape. This period marks the high point for Denis Dyack and Silicon Knights. They enjoyed an immense amount of security and respect in the gaming industry, and were very content to be close allies of Nintendo. In interviews, Dyack would claim that his company and Nintendo were inseparable, and that they would never leave their station at Nintendo's side, not ever. But when Denis saw where Nintendo was headed with the Wii, he was so disappointed with the technical limitations of their next system that he left the supportive and successful environment he and his team had experienced at Nintendo to pursue his passion project, Too Human, as well as other titles. A team-up with Microsoft, who offered support and funding to Silicon Knights, and Epic Games, who licensed their Unreal 3 engine and technologies to Dyack's team, took place. This version of Too Human would prove to be drastically different than the PlayStation and GameCube attempts that preceded it. Contrary to popular belief, Too Human was not worked on continuously from 1997 to 2008. In reality, there were two distinct periods of development with a 5-year hiatus between them. A little-known fact is that, according to a senior, long-term staff member of Silicon Knights, a version of Too Human was also being prepared for release on the Sega Saturn. Not much of the game was completed beyond some concept art, 3D background modeling for cutscenes and key rooms, and a little modeling on robotic-style characters. On the Xbox 360, Too Human would abandon all of the original emphasis on stealth and complex player choices for cybernetic Norse gods and a gameplay that fused the action of Devil May Cry with the loot-based RPG elements of Diablo. Rather than being set in the future, Too Human would take place in the past with themes of high-tech, prehistoric civilizations fighting an endless war with their own technology. The hype for this game was considerable, and probably placed expectations way beyond what any game could reasonably deliver on. Its critical reception was middling to positive, ranging between a 6 and 8 out of 10 from most review sites. From here, we begin to see a darker side of Denis. He became so personally invested in this project that he went on several tirades online, attempting to discredit reviewers and players who were not portraying his game positively by faulting them for their inability to appreciate the greatness of the game he had worked so long to create. As time went on, the stress from his desire to defend his pet project caused Dyack to become more and more unhinged. His poor PR skills began to manifest themselves fully, and instead of taking personal responsibility for the end result of the project, he began to look for a scapegoat to pass the blame onto. This toxic mindset eventually led Dyack to place blame on Epic Games for his predicament. In 2005, Silicon Knights began early development on Too Human using incomplete versions of Epic's Unreal 3 engine. In 2007, Silicon Knights sued Epic for providing inadequate supports and services for working with their engine. About a month later, Epic countersued Silicon Knights for using its engine without paying royalties. In 2012, Silicon Knights lost the suit and was forced to pay $4.5 million in damages. They were then ordered by the court to recall and destroy all unsold copies of games made using Unreal Engine 3, as well as cancel 3 future projects that used Unreal Engine 3 code. This also meant that the pair of sequels planned for Too Human would also be cancelled. By 2014, Silicon Knights filed for bankruptcy. Since this time, Denis Dyack has attempted to create a spiritual successor to Eternal Darkness titled Shadow of the Eternals with company Precursor Games. 2 failed Kickstarter campaigns later, it appears the notoriety Denis gained from his poor PR habits and his troubling history of company mismanagement has left little of his reputation to salvage. This is truly a shame, as Dyack has recently owned up to his mistakes and acknowledged that he serves his projects better as part of the creative process, as opposed to the business management side of things. This is further encouraged by his strides to become a better person and let go of the attachments that bring out his more unsavory qualities. I honestly feel that he deserves another chance to create a great game. Time will tell whether or not he will be given one. So what do I think of Too Human? In all honesty, I'm into it. Like, really into it. While the game has major flaws, like poor camera angles, a symptom caused from sacrificing the right analog stick function to be used for attacking instead of traditional camera control, I find the science fiction interpretation of Norse mythology to be very compelling and immersive. Also, the combat, while a bit sticky in places, also works really well once you get into the flow of things. I really enjoy the melee combat of the Berserker class, and I've always loved loot-based action games. In my opinion, Too Human is a good game that could have been great with a few tweaks. It makes me sad that there will never be a sequel to the first installment because Too Human is a gameplay experience that I want more of. I'm just glad there are still copies out there that haven't been destroyed yet. In a cruel twist of fate, Denis Dyack failed to see that while he uncompromisingly fought to protect his passion project Too Human from external threats, the greatest threat to the success and longevity of the Too Human franchise came from none other than himself. The act of unintentionally destroying what one cares for the most is a flaw that is only too human. That's it for my second video in my series of pet projects of gaming icons. I hope all of you found this as interesting as I did. Let me know what you thought in the comments below, along with any suggestions you might have for future installments of this series. Until the next time, be safe and take care.